I didn't plan to say anything at my brother's wedding. I really didn't. I had the dress. I had the smile. I had the whole performance rehearsed. Stand in the back, eat whatever they put in front of me, clap when everyone else claps, and drive home alone before dessert so I don't have to hear my mother ask my brother's new wife if she's planning on having kids soon. I had done this at every family event for the past 8 years. I was good at it. I was practically a professional at disappearing in a room full of people who technically knew my name. But then my mother grabbed the microphone, and everything I had spent a decade quietly building, every late night, every skipped vacation, every birthday I worked through, got introduced to 47 people as my son's little sister, who's still figuring things out. Still figuring things out. I was 31 years old. I owned a business. I had 3 employees and a client list that included 2 Fortune 500 companies. I had just signed a contract the week before that was worth more than my parents' house. But in that banquet hall, in front of my brother's entire new family and every person they had ever wanted to impress, I was the one still figuring things out. I didn't cry. I didn't walk out. I picked up my glass of water, took a slow sip, and I smiled. Because I had learned a long time ago that the most dangerous thing I could do in that family was let them see that anything they said still landed. My brother's name is Corey. He is 4 years older than me, and he has been the center of my parents' universe since the day he was born. I don't say that with bitterness anymore. I used to when I was younger, and still trying to understand why the same parents who coached his little league games for 6 years forgot to pick me up from my middle school play. Now I say it the way you describe the weather. It's just a fact of the landscape. Corey is charming and loud and magnetic. He can walk into a room and make everyone feel like they've known him forever. He's the kind of person who gets upgraded on flights and doesn't understand why that doesn't happen to everyone. He's never been cruel to me. That's the thing people never quite believe when I tell them about my family. He was never mean. He was just there, and I was also there, and those two things were never quite equal. My mother made sure of that. Not maliciously, I think. Or maybe I just tell myself that because the alternative is harder to sit with. But she had a way of talking about us that made the difference very clear. Corey was driven. I was independent. Corey knew what he wanted. I was always in my own world. Corey's successes were announced. Mine were noted, if they were noticed at all. When I was 22 and fresh out of college, I started a small graphic design business out of my apartment. I had a laptop, a subscription to Adobe Creative Cloud, and about $400 in my checking account. My mother's response, when I told her, was to ask if I had a backup plan. My father nodded along beside her like he always did. Corey, who had just landed a sales job at a mid-size company in Phoenix, had gotten a celebratory dinner at their favorite steakhouse. I didn't get a backup plan. I got clients. It was slow, the way most real things are. The first 2 years were genuinely hard. I'm not going to romanticize it. There were months where I moved money around between accounts just to cover rent. There were weekends I didn't leave my apartment because I was finishing projects, and also because I was too tired to pretend to be okay around other people. I missed my college roommate's bachelorette trip because I couldn't afford it and was too proud to say so. I ate a lot of rice and frozen vegetables and told myself it was temporary. It was temporary. But the version of me that came out the other side wasn't the same person who went in. By the time I was 25, I had a small but steady client base. By 27, I had hired my first contractor. By 29, I had a proper LLC, a real office space, just a room I rented in a co-working building, but still, and enough consistent revenue that I could finally stop doing the mental math every time I bought groceries. My parents knew I did something with design. I had tried multiple times to explain it in more detail. My mother would listen with the specific expression she used when she was being polite, and then redirect the conversation to Corey's quarterly numbers, or his new apartment, or the woman he was seeing, who was lovely and who eventually became his wife, Leanne. I liked Leanne, actually. She was straightforward and funny, and treated me like a regular person, which, in that family, felt like a gift. She texted me directly when she wanted my opinion on the wedding invitations. Which, Given that she didn't know what I did for a living, I found quietly funny. She said she just liked my taste. I designed them for free as a wedding present, but I didn't tell my mother that. My mother found out when Leanne mentioned it at the rehearsal dinner. My mother smiled and said, "Oh, how sweet. The way you say, 'bless your heart' in certain parts of the country," and then changed the subject to the centerpieces. The wedding was in September, at a venue outside of Nashville. Leanne's family was from Tennessee originally, and she'd wanted something with a little land and some trees, which I thought was a good call. It was genuinely beautiful. White lights strung through old oaks, wooden chairs on a lawn that had been cut to look like velvet, a tent with chandeliers that probably cost more per hour than my rent did when I was 23. I wore a burgundy dress I had bought specifically for this occasion and had driven 8 hours to be there, alone. Because I was between relationships and my mother had made a comment at Christmas about whether I was seeing anyone special, in a tone that made it clear she already had thoughts about my answer. The ceremony was perfect. Leanne cried when she saw Corey at the altar, and Corey genuinely, this surprised me, cried too. I sat in the third row and felt something uncomplicated for the first time in a long time. I was happy for them. Just straightforwardly happy. The reception is where things shifted. It started fine. There was a cocktail hour, a buffet, a first dance. Leanne's aunt gave a toast that was warm and funny and made everyone tear up a little. Corey's best friend gave a toast that was a little too long but ended well. My father raised his glass and said a few quiet, genuine words about love and commitment, and I thought, okay, we're doing okay. Maybe tonight is just going to be a nice night. Then, my mother took the micro. She hadn't been scheduled to speak. I think she had a few glasses of champagne during the cocktail hour and decided that Leanne's aunt shouldn't be the only mother figure with something to say. That's conjecture. What I know for a fact is that she stood up, got the DJ to pass her the microphone, and began talking. She talked about Corey for about 3 minutes. How proud she was. How he had always been the kind of person who went after what he wanted. How she knew the day he was born that he was going to be someone. She talked about Leanne, warmly and genuinely, and welcomed her to the family. It was lovely. It was the kind of speech that would get saved in someone's memory forever. And then, she said, almost as an afterthought, "And we're so glad Corey's little sister could make the drive up from Atlanta to be here tonight. She's still figuring things out, but we're proud of her too," she said it with a smile. A real one. The room did what rooms do when something lands a little wrong. A light, brief quiet, a few polite chuckles, and then everyone moved on. My aunt, sitting 2 seats down from me, reached over and put her hand briefly on mine without saying anything. Leanne, across the room, caught my eye for just a second, with an expression I couldn't my plate. I took a breath. I thought about the contract I had signed 6 days earlier. I thought about the email I'd received that morning from a client who wanted to expand our retainer agreement. I thought about my 3 employees, who were real people with real lives who depended in part on decisions I made. I thought, still figuring things out. And then I picked up my fork and kept eating, because I was not going to give my mother the satisfaction of watching me react in front of 47 witnesses. Here is what nobody in my family knew that night. 3 weeks before the wedding, I had been approached by a brand consultancy based in Chicago. I'm not going to name them because we have an NDA, but they are well known in the industry, about a potential acquisition of my company. Not a buyout, an acquisition with a continued role for me, an earnout structure, and a number that I had to read twice before I believed it. I had spent those 3 weeks in conversations with their team and with a business attorney I hired specifically for this purpose, who cost more per hour than my mother probably assumed I made in a day. The deal wasn't finalized yet. There were still details to work through, but the letter of intent was signed. The conversation was real. The number was real. I had told no one in my family, not because I was waiting for the right moment, exactly, more because I had learned, slowly and over many years, that my family was not a safe place to put tender things. When you show something fragile to people who have a history of not knowing its value, you risk them handling it in ways that damage it. I had learned that the hard way, the first few times, and then I had just stopped. But that night, after my mother's toast, I sat with something new. The knowledge that in my pocket, metaphorically, I was carrying something that made the whole narrative of my family look different. Not just different, almost funny, in the way that painful things can become funny after enough time and distance, still figuring things out. The moment that actually changed the evening didn't come from me. It came from Lisanne's cousin, a man named Bridger, who worked in venture capital in Austin and had apparently been researching weddings guests the way some people do when they're bored before an event and want conversation starters. He came over to me during the second round of dancing with 2 glasses of something amber and a very specific look on his face. "Are you the one who designed the wedding invitations?" he asked. I said yes. "I thought so," he said. "I recognize the style. I've seen your work before. We used your agency for a rebrand last year." Well, the company I was advising did. I didn't make the connection until Leanne mentioned it at the table. He said the name of the company. It was one of my clients, a tech firm out of Seattle that I had done a full brand overhaul for 18 months ago. Their logo, their website, their entire visual identity system. It was one of the projects I was most proud of. It had been written up in a couple of industry publications. "Your work is everywhere," he said. "I mean that. You've built something genuinely impressive." I said thank you. I meant it. What I didn't know was that my mother was standing close enough to hear him. I didn't realize it until Bridger had drifted back toward the dance floor, and I turned around and found her standing about 6 feet away with a champagne glass halfway to her mouth and an expression I had never seen on her face before. It wasn't embarrassment. Exactly. It was something quieter, something that looked almost like recalibrations. She said, "I didn't know you worked with companies like that." I said, "You never asked." I said it gently, not as an accusation, just as a fact. The way you state a fact when the moment has arrived for it to be stated. She opened her mouth and then closed it again. The music kept playing. Across the room, Corey was attempting to teach Leanne's elderly grandfather how to do something that vaguely resembled the electric slide. My mother said, "I think I misunderstood what you were doing." "I think so too," I said. And then I excused myself to get a glass of water, because I didn't trust myself to keep my voice that even if the conversation continued. And because I had learned that ending something at the right moment is its own form of power. The drive back to the hotel that night was quiet. I had a single room on the 3rd floor with a window that faced the parking lot, and I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time without turning on the television. I kept waiting to feel triumphant. That's the word people use for moments like this. Like I had won something or arrived somewhere. What I actually felt was tired. And a little sad, in a way I couldn't entirely explain. Because here's the thing that doesn't fit neatly into a story about someone finally being seen. Being seen that late still costs something. Being recognized not because someone paid attention, but because a stranger validated you in front of the right people. It's not quite the same as being known. It's not the thing you actually wanted, which was for your mother to have asked, at any point in 8 years, a single real question about your work, about your life, about what it felt like to build something from nothing, alone, without anyone in your family even noticing you were doing it. Bridger didn't give me that. The acquisition didn't give me that. Standing in that reception hall watching my mother recalibrate didn't give me that. What it gave me was something different. Something smaller, and, in some ways, more honest. It gave me confirmation that I had not been wrong about what I was building. That the years of being dismissed had not in fact diminished anything I had actually accomplished. That the version of me my family carried in their heads, the one still figuring things out, was a fiction they had written for reasons that had nothing to do with me. That's not nothing. It's just not everything. In the weeks after the wedding, my mother called me twice. Both times were real calls, not the occasional check-in texts she usually sent. The first call was a little awkward. She asked about my work in the general, careful way people ask about things when they're embarrassed they didn't ask sooner. I answered her questions without making her feel worse than she already did. Because I'm not interested in punishing people. I'm interested in things being different going forward. The second call was better. She asked specifically about a project I had mentioned, and she listened while I explained it, and at the end, she said, "I had no idea you were doing all of this." I said, "I know." She said she was sorry. Not in a big dramatic way. Just quietly, like someone admitting something they'd been carrying for a while. I said I appreciated that. I don't know what happens from here, honestly. I'm not naive enough to think one conversation, or one night, undoes decades of a particular dynamic. Family patterns are stubborn things. They have roots. My mother will probably still light up a little more when Corey walks in the room, and my father will probably still agree with whatever she says, and there will probably still be moments where I feel like a guest in my own family rather than a member of it. But something shifted. I felt it. She felt it. The acquisition closed 3 months after the wedding. I signed the papers on a Tuesday afternoon and then walked to a coffee shop, 2 blocks from my attorney's office, and sat by the window for an hour by myself, just existing in the fact of it. I called my closest friend. I called my business attorney to thank her. I sat with it quietly for a while. I didn't call my mother that day. I wasn't ready for the version of this news that travels through a family. The way it would become in her telling, something she'd always seen coming. The way the story tends to get rewritten once the outcome is clear. Maybe I'll tell her. Maybe I already have, by the time you're hearing this. What I want you to take from this: if you're out there in a family that has a Corey, or a mother with a microphone, or a father who agrees with everything she says, is that the people who fail to see you are not the ones who determine your value. They feel like they are. Sometimes. They feel like the jury. But they're not. They were just the first audience you had, and they came in with a verdict already written. You don't have to wait for them to revise it. You don't have to stand up in a banquet hall and prove anything. You don't have to correct the record publicly, or explain yourself, or earn your place in a room. You just have to keep building the thing you're building, in whatever quieter room has space for you, until the work becomes undeniable to everyone, including the people who were too busy looking somewhere else to notice it growing. And when someone finally looks at you with that expression my mother had, that recalibration look, you are allowed the satisfaction, the sadness, the weird mixture of both. You don't have to perform gratitude you don't feel. You don't have to forgive on a timeline that isn't yours. You don't have to make it easy for them. You just have to know, somewhere steady inside yourself, that you never needed their permission to begin. I didn't say a word that night at my brother's wedding. I didn't have to. The work said it for me.